Welcome to the From Concealment Podcast, the show for firearm enthusiasts who like to shoot, train, carry, and compete. Get ready for some shooting and sight, firearm and accessory reviews, and of course, insight on concealed carry. And now, broadcasting from behind enemy lines in the From Concealment studio, it's Pete Mitchell and Dan Sams.
Hey, Freedom Nation, this is Pete Mitchell.
And I'm Dan Zams.
You're admitting to being Dan
Today,
Zams.
I'll admit it. Today.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like it. So, man, dude, first thing I want to kick off with, well, I guess there's a couple of COVID things going on internationally right now.
Yeah.
First of all, what did you think about England and their whole, you know what? Screw all these rules, mandates. We're going back to normal. What's your thought on that?
I think it's great. I am surprised.
How are they the ones leading the world?
That's the same. I'm like, man, these, socialists effectively over there that have all of a sudden said, yeah, we're done with this. This is stupid. I'm glad for it. I'm just surprised. Honestly, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of in the first year of Trump's presidency, when people were like, hey, what do you think of all this? And I'm like, well, he's actually doing a few things that he promised. I really don't like him, but I'm surprised. I'm pleased at some of them, not all of them.
Right.
But like, well, that's okay. Cool. Like, it's one of those, like, I still don't like him, still don't trust him, but I guess that's good. Like, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on it. Yeah.
The other one too that I just saw briefly on Facebook, man, and I gotta look up the hashtag on it. Let's see here. Okay, it has something to do with the convoy to Ottawa 2022. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, buddy.
Tell me what you've heard about it, because I just heard about it today.
Yeah.
And I'm like, because Canada is so much worse than the United States as far as COVID restrictions. Unbelievably.
Yeah. Well, and they're going more draconian on even more things.
Yes.
Actually, can we give a quick picture? Because I'm not sure everybody knows all that's going on in there. And then let's talk about the convoy thing. First, people don't realize there were provinces in Canada shut down nearly completely when there were no cases in the region. So some people, you might have heard me mention Pastor James Coates in Alberta. And they stopped him from having church. They stopped all kinds of stuff. They put fences around his church, arrested him. I mean, really,
he's serving in jail for 6 years now because of that.
I don't know that he's in jail for 6 years. There's another guy that's getting 6 years, but he's expected. And they just reinstituted lockdowns. They kind of like eased up a little bit, but people don't realize, like, while that was happening, there were like no cases in Alberta. It was like there was no reason for them to have lockdowns because nobody was sick. And yet they were pushing those. And of course, we got to one point where you could go to a Toronto Blue Jays game, but you couldn't go to church. And so you had some of these things that were going on kind of shady. And we were seeing all this other stuff as
let's
well.
remember to put that in perspective. Nevada would let you go to a casino, but you couldn't go to church.
Same thing. Yeah. Same thing. Oh, and remember how the Supreme Court ruling went on that.
Yes. But we have a Supreme Court that has to follow a Bill of Rights. So, we got a little bit different stance than Canada.
Yes. Well, and that there was a lot of debate because they have a charter up there. It's not the same as like our Constitution. But even that was being thrown out the window. All kinds of things, just a mess there. And I don't know if you know, this is kind of a side note, but it speaks to where things are at in Canada. They have a law on the books now as of January 2nd. It's called the C4 law, which is aptly titled. And the C4 law is written broadly enough that essentially if you do anything to help counsel someone out of homosexuality or out of a transgender lifestyle, even if they're asking you to, you can get 5 years in prison. Yeah. Now, the language of that is broad enough that, like, if a pastor preaches from certain texts of scripture, technically could get 5 years. Now, they're probably not going to enforce it right now, but we're just seeing this movement towards more and more totalitarian function in Canada, and it's not good. So with all that in mind, and as they're enforcing all these things, and of course, COVID has been their hammer that they've used, this freedom convoy idea came along. And so, Pete, do you have some thoughts on it? You said you just heard about it today?
I heard about it today. I was a pastor I know out of, where's that state? Pennsylvania. He's definitely more of a libertarian for sure. Nice. I mean, he's definitely thinking along our lines. And he promoted a Facebook group for it. So I started following the group, and somebody was saying, I thought this was really interesting, how none of the news was talking about it up in Canada. They were all trying to avoid it because this convoy apparently is really big. Basically, they're protesting the vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers. And so they're doing a huge convoy. Mm-hmm. And what I found was really interesting. The guy goes, you know what? So I heard about it, wasn't seeing anything on the news. So I looked at the live feeds on, the live cameras that you can find on the internet, and there was nothing. So I call a buddy of mine, and I can barely hear him. It's so loud. There's so many trucks. And the weather is different than what's on the live feed. So they've literally changed the live feed so people couldn't see the truckers protesting. Like, if that isn't shady, and let's get our propaganda to beat their I mean, dude,
that's beyond shady.
That is what is going on up in Canada. That's
freaking Goebbels, man. I mean, that's Goebbels style. That's how they do it, man. It's infuriating, dude. It's like I get burned up thinking about it, and I'm like, yeah, I'm mad.
And, I always look at it, and I told my wife this. I go, the downside is they don't have guns up there like we do down here.
It's exactly what I was thinking, man.
Like, because I'm reading, we're going to talk about this. I'm reading those books that you recommended, right? Started with Going Home by A American. Now I'm on Surviving Home by A American. And I'm like, yeah, okay. All of this stuff I could see totally coming down the pipe, down the pipe.
One of the things I've said related to those books, and for those who haven't listened last time, the books are there's an EMP attack. They're written from by an actual, survivalist who's writing fiction, really good writer, but of course he's teaching along the way. But what was interesting to me is so many of the things we see in that, I feel like, are just more pronounced versions of the things we've seen during COVID. It's like, there was a disaster, and here's how the government's going to respond, and you better get on board with it or else.
Well, one of the things that I've along those lines that I thought was really so telling. Okay, so now again, you've read way more of the books than I have. I'm literally on book 2, and I'm a few hours into it, right? Because I'm listening to it on Audible. Mm-hmm. And they got the post office involved in doing a census, and they're relocating people to basically work camps. I mean, that's what it's going to be. I mean, I haven't gotten that far, but that's clearly where they're going with it. But you got the Department of Homeland Security, and they're taking away all the guns from civilians. And if you have a working vehicle, that's confiscated by the government. Mm-hmm. So you're totally dependent on the government. And I'm sitting there looking at this going, okay, the people who are now in charge, Homeland Security, the postman, right, who's now finally got a real job, he's got real power, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this could totally happen in real life because we've seen it through the pandemic. We've seen how everybody freaked out and started snitching on their neighbors. Hey, homeboy over here is having more than 10 people at his house. And hey, this restaurant over here isn't closing down. And this one's not making people wear masks. And I'm like, yeah, this could totally happen.
Well, and if that was going to happen, what better way for them to prepare for it to get people thinking like snitches than what's just happened the last 18 months?
Right.
I mean, now we're coming up on almost a full 2 years now.
But it's funny in reading the book, because it takes place, at least so far, primarily in Florida. I'm thinking Florida is the gunshine state. So, okay, in certain parts of Florida, be pretty easy to confiscate weapons. Major cities, basically Orlando, Tampa, any major city, you're going to have all the liberals. They're not going to have many guns. It's going to be only the hillbillies with the guns. But I'm sitting here going, okay, there are some parts of the country you could not pull this crap off in. Just, there is no way people in Texas are giving up their guns. It's not happening. I mean, Austin, yes, like I said, right? The big major cities, Houston, the city of Dallas, yeah, they're going to give it up, but no one else is giving up their guns. And I don't know how you'd get around that in real life.
Yeah.
If you're trying to confiscate.
So, so much interesting stuff. And here's what's also interesting related to this is I'm reading the book series 1 Second After, which is followed by 1 Year After. And
I read 1 Second After. I didn't know that there were more books in that series.
Yeah. But same kind of concept. But 1 Second After was like the foreword is written by Newt Gingrich, and he's essentially saying, we had experts that briefed us on the dangers of an EMP attack, and here's the crazy thing. He doesn't say this. I found out about this another way. I don't think it was him that said it. The commission report on the EMP attacks came out the same day as the 9/11 reports, so it got buried. So what is probably the biggest danger to our country right now got buried under a discussion on 9/11.
Right.
And so the reason why these books were written, the 1 Second After books, that is, was because they're like, we have to get the word out that this is serious. And so it's actual guys that like worked in the military, worked in whatever, that are like, nobody's listening and you need to know. So it's not just some crackpot, hide in the back of the woods writing a story. Like, these are guys who were like up there, got the briefings, and they're like, why does nobody care? Like, this is a problem.
See, China, they see themselves as, hey, look, we ruled the world for 2,300 years. We're going to go back to ruling the world. So they're just looking for their opportunities, and every chance they get, taking a ding at everybody, whoever they can, because they see themselves as, we're going to rule the world again. So in a scenario of an EMP, here's, again, part of the issue that I see. You're going to see that California, most of California could be easily invaded and taken over. All your major cities, San Francisco, LA.
That's how it goes in 1 year after.
What's that?
That's exactly how it goes in 1 year after, is China comes in and takes over California and pretty much all of the desert states on the Pacific coast.
See, I don't think you could take over the desert states like Arizona. Way too many guns. Like, that was the big problem with Japan, right? They even said it. Hey, don't wake the sleeping giant or the sleeping dragon, because behind every blade of grass, there's going to be a rifle. That is Arizona. That is at least Las Vegas.
So fully agree, but there's a secondary issue. So the desert states are not livable
without modern technology.
You have to have modern technology to stay alive.
True.
For crying out loud, like LA County, like, you guys pump your river in from somewhere else, right? Yeah. Like, so if you have an EMP attack, now all of a sudden it's like, man, I might have guns in Arizona, not of course in California, which by the way does give a beachhead to the enemy, right? Oh, yeah. But in that kind of a scenario, it's like, okay, I have no means of getting water anywhere. So people who are not prepared, fighting off a Chinese force that's coming in, and of course, you know what their first step is going to be? They're going to be wearing blue helmets, and they're going to be saying, we're here for humanitarian help. Would you like a bottle of water for your child who hasn't had a drink in 3 days? And you're going to be like, yep. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm going to have to do. And they're blue helmets. They're really here for whatever. So the way that they sneak in is going to be different. And that's my big concern with all of this. The guns are important, right? But if I'm not prepared in other ways, I can still die, and puts me in a compromising position. But I think you're right.
No, I totally agree, because especially in the suburbs, like I live in the suburbs now, and when I move, I'm going to move to a suburb. And it's like, I look at that and I'm like, okay, dude, first of all, that is not where you want to be in an EMP scenario. Like, you don't want to be in populated anything, but that's where we're going to be.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I can't get my wife to go anywhere else. So
yeah,
I just got to kind of, deal with it and maybe buy a piece of property somewhere and that I could get to and stock it up. I mean, that's not a terrible, that's a lot of people. That's their bug out plan. It's like, you've got a farm out a few miles. When even here, like I'm effectively in a suburb, I'm in a township, but, I don't know. Of course I wouldn't be driving, but it's a 20-minute drive for me to get to reasonably rural farmland out here. Right. Wouldn't be ideal, but if I wanted to buy someplace out there, that wouldn't be a bad thing. Of course, I'm in a. Are you in a suburb?
It's a township. I wouldn't call it a suburb. Well, I should say most people wouldn't call it a suburb. Given where I used to live, this feels like a suburb to me. Like, I'm used to living where either you're a family member or I don't see your house.
Right.
Right. Like my grandparents' farm was 110 acres surrounded by more farms. And, man, like I could take off into the woods and I could go a long, long way, in pretty dense forest without anybody being able to find me. And I wish let's just say it would be nice if I still had that farm. Right. But yeah, I'm in a better situation than most where I'm at, but it's certainly not ideal. My benefit is I've got good neighbors, and we got some things we could do. And I've got my homies, man. We've got people that we're going to connect with when, as they say, what is it Cypress Hill says? When the shit goes down.
I don't know. I thought it was jump around.
No, that's the other one. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good song, man. It's not using the best God honoring words, but it's the message is good.
If Paul can use the word in the Bible, pretty sure you could use it in the song.
It's close to the Greek version.
Gonna throw that one out there.
Yeah. Well, if you've seen what's the movie?
What's funny is people don't understand that because they've got their cleaned up versions of the Bible. They don't have what Paul literally said.
Yeah. Scubalon. Yeah. Great word. So anyway, this is a good time to just kind of mention, we talk a lot about guns. Obviously, we are the From Concealment podcast. We love guns. We think guns are really, really important for everybody who is good, or at least not a villain. But I do want to maybe make a plug for reasonable preparedness. The more I'm reading, the more I'm understanding, and even just put aside all this other like conspiracy theory stuff or whatever you want to call it. Just a storm could put you in a pretty bad situation pretty quick. And so be prepared with some food, a means to cook it, some really basic ways to stay warm in your home, ways to have light, have some candles, have some, people don't understand how quickly, I know a lot of these people that they don't actually keep food in their house. Like they go to the grocery store on the way home from work and buy the food that they're going to cook that night. That's stupid. Like, I'm just going to tell you, that's ridiculous for a whole bunch of reasons. Like, you should at minimum have roughly 30 days of food ready just if there was a storm, man. Like, it's just that. But, man, you can get rice and beans pretty cheap. Rice and beans, maybe some quinoa. You're not spending that much money, and you can store up 3 or 4 months of basic food pretty quickly. Obviously, you should go beyond that. But, man, rice and beans, you guys, get you somewhere. A means to cook it. Water, some kind of water storage. I have a pool out back. I can purify that water. I have another reservoir. I have access to a lot of water. Not as much food as I would like, but working on that. But you guys be prepared because it's not.
Would those life straws actually work on pool water?
So I probably wouldn't wait. I mean, life straw would. Yes, it would. I would say that you would, but I wouldn't do that because it's like the life straw is really more designed for you're on the move, right? And you need water now. And it does really well. But if I'm at my house, I don't want to, I don't know, whatever, it's 10,000 gallons that'll go through one of those things. I forget what it is.
I don't remember.
I don't want to, yeah, that's a lot, but I don't want to waste it effectively. So I would probably.
How would you clean pool water with all the chlorine and stuff in it?
Well, so there's a couple of things. First of all, like there's ways to neutralize that. The first thing I would do is I would do your old fashioned filtering. We'd boil it. We'd do the whole thing. There's several ways to treat it. The reality is most of that kind of stuff will settle out. I'd recommend looking up how to do it, but it's still water. You can treat it and use it. Might not be ideal. And so here's the other thing. When you're thinking pool water, you're thinking the pool that's being used all the time. My pool gets used 3 months out of the year, right? Maybe 4. And so it's treated and sitting with a cover on it right now. It's not high in chlorine right now, right? So, I mean, it's basically like having a pond, So like, yes, I would treat it like I would a pond water. That it's the absence of chemicals is more of a concern for me right now than the presence of them. So yeah, but some preparation is good. And I'll recommend, if you guys want to check out Self-Reliance Outfitters, it's Pathfinder Bushcraft's shop. They've got a lot of real basic bushcraft and survivalist tools that are worth having around, and their prices are good. Even stuff like a basic, like having a wool hat, like a wool toboggan and, watch cap kind of deal, instead of, one of those, whatever synthetic ones you would get from Walmart, like stuff like that. Windproof matches, an outdoor grill that you can, build a fire and grill stuff. There's just a lot of things that are worth checking out. Everybody should have some basic survival gear and then some stored food, and it's just a good thing. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. Pete, do you have any more thoughts on that? We were talking, that was all in the context of the Freedom Convoy, by the way.
I know, right?
Isn't that wild? I love how we get on a run. Here's what's cool about the Freedom Convoy. You've got the convoy that's going across the country in Canada, but then, like, as you were saying, like hundreds of people are coming out to truck stops and whatever to essentially just support and wish them well. And so good on them, man. I'm saying that's awesome.
I know. And I'm still kind of dumbfounded that England takes the lead and says, we're done. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's really going on here, man, because I don't trust that.
Nothing makes sense. Well, and just is a good chance to talk about, I know that like just shady people tend to be the people that are in charge of human.
California is still under its emergency powers for the governor. He's never given them up 2 years later.
Yeah, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah.
So this is related to all this. Are you following? And this is what's interesting. So we always got the shady people there. I do recognize that every now and then people get, I don't like to use this phrase, but people get red pilled, right? Where they just suddenly are like, hey, wait a minute. I don't know if you saw, Not the Bee shared that series of tweets from that woman in San Francisco. And she just goes on a rant, and she's like, and really, like, you can tell she's like being awakened. She's like, wait a minute. We're in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. We have the most, quote unquote, progressive. She didn't say quote. She's like, we have the most progressive government, and we have more homeless people than like nearly any other city. She's like, it's a wreck here. What's going on? And essentially, she's like, if all these progressive policies work, why is it worse right now? And all of us libertarians are like, she's getting it. But every now and then, even somebody far over there just gets kind of awakened, and they're like, wait a minute. And so
isn't that Candace Owens' story?
Yeah. I mean, she was an Obama supporter. Yeah. So what's interesting is that still happens. And I mean, man, we're in a big mess right now, and people are starting to admit it. And so I wonder a little bit if something like that, could that happen in England, where people are just like, this is nuts. If you're following Israel, well, they have more vaccines and boosters than anywhere, and they're
4 shots. That's what they're at.
They are. I mean, they're not even touching it, right? It's worse there than most places, right? So you've got that kind of stuff going on. I don't know, the report that came out, was it last week? And I mean, we already knew this, although we didn't have the specific data, but they're saying that the natural immunity is 6 times stronger.
I put that on Facebook, and I said, I wonder how long until Facebook calls this false. And I noticed that they didn't share it with hardly anyone.
Oh yeah. They're using their algorithms to just choke it back.
Yeah.
But think about that. Like 6 times stronger. So like, A guy
Now,
like
to be
Leroy,
fair, what the study was saying, if you had caught COVID and then you went up against Delta, the Delta variant, you were better than someone who had the shots, the 2 shots, and went up against the Delta variant. So it's, so just understand, it means you had COVID, you had the original strain of COVID, and then you went up against Delta, and they're saying, yeah, that was better than the shots going up against Delta.
So recognizing that would mean a guy like Leroy is better equipped immune-wise to deal with whatever is coming, Delta specifically, although that's now moving in the past, than the guy who's got the jab. But Leroy is going to have trouble going into some stores and restaurants in the US because he doesn't have the jab, right? It's like he's actually safer.
Right.
But they're going to treat him like he's more of a danger. And enough people start noticing that, thinking about that. It doesn't take very much thinking before either you have to just willfully be ignorant or you make a change.
Yeah.
Here's what was surprising me related to all this. I never watch SNL anymore because I think it's just stupid. I haven't laughed watching SNL hardly at all in years, but you know how on Instagram they give you the little reels that like they just, as you're scrolling down, there's a run of reels. Brilliant, by the way, because as a marketer, like I've noticed I can post something for one of my clients.
Who did they steal that from again? It wasn't Snap. I don't remember. Maybe it was Snapchat. Maybe it was TikTok. I don't remember who it was, but they stole it from someone.
It's very TikTok-ish, although I'm not on TikTok because it's, Chinese shill, but
it is the China. That's the problem with, I got a friend who's like killing it in ads on TikTok. And I'm like, yeah,
I don't want
to, but we know China is using TikTok to infiltrate the US.
Yeah.
And to get data on all the US personnel.
It's absolutely overt.
And, I can't use it.
Yeah.
As if Facebook's any better.
I know. Yeah, they're all bad. Here's what's funny though, because I don't watch SNL, but this reel comes up from SNL. I don't know if it was last week, but you see Pete Davidson comes out, but like he's wearing a suit. He's got his hair slicked back and he's got like Terminator sunglasses on and he's talking different. And they're like, oh my gosh, who are you? What's going on? And he's like, well, I'm the real Joe Biden from the real world. And they're like, what? Are you saying we're not living in a real world? He's like, no. He's like, this was a joke. You've got it right there. Can you play it?
Okay, who the hell is that?
I am Joe Biden from the real universe. The timeline you are all living in is about to collapse. You see, it was created as a joke starting in 2016 when the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. Now it's spiraled out of control and could explode at any minute. Am I the president in this real world? Of course not. Did you really think you would lose 4 times and then finally win when you were 78?
What about the rest of us? Are we okay in the real world?
Everyone on Earth is better off in the real world except one man named Pete Davidson. Your world is maybe more fun for him.
Which, if you're following anything going on with Pete Davidson, which not by choice, but it's just
right. Yeah.
Right. Like you just are told about it. People who hate him are like, how did that guy end up with Ariana Grande and Kim Kardashian? Like, what's he doing? Like, look at him.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that right there, I'm like, is SNL just admitting? Like, I mean, it's like, it's overt. It's like the world is crumbling here. Clearly, there's no way that Joe Biden could have won legitimately. And it's like they're making a joke out of it, but it's like, yeah, you're kind of paying attention to what's obvious here. And I'm like, if SNL makes that joke, even their joke a while back about like where it's like Republican or Democrat, remember that one? Where like the person would come up and it was like a game show and the contestants had to guess Republican or Democrat.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Comes up and they're like, I hate cops. I think we might have talked about it. And they're like, oh, Democrat. And then it's like, oh, but he hates the Capitol Hill police. And they're like, whoa, he's a Republican. And it keeps going on and on to all these things where it's like, oh, this is hilarious. But like all the people start second guessing and I'm like, you know what, whether intentional or not, SNL's addressing that, like, there's very unique and interesting things going on right now, and the world isn't exactly as it may seem.
Right.
And mostly they're just left as shills. But even them, like, we've got a few of these little bright spots that I'm like, you guys been thinking about this some, huh? And of course, in my business as a pastor, I mean, we fundamentally believe that God is the one. Well, I guess me being a Calvinist, that God is the one who, like, changes a heart. Right. We call it regeneration. And so I'm like, I mean, I've seen it where somebody was hater of God, and I mean, it was just a miracle, and they believe. Right. And so if that can happen, yeah, you can change a leftist mind too, you know? So some hope while you stockpile food and ammunition.
Food, ammo, and guns, man.
Yeah. I'm looking to get a few other things. I want to get a solar oven, a couple of things that are, like, just kind of cool to have around anyway. And if you guys have not read the book, The Lost Ways, there's a second one out yet. I haven't read yet, but it just teaches you how to make and do all this stuff that the pioneers did. And I'm like, handy, like how to smoke meat, how to make hardtack, how to make glue out of whatever, like, just kind of cool. A little bit, I think, on how to make gunpowder, but I'm not ready.
Does it talk about that? How to make gunpowder?
I think that one does. I can't remember which book. I've read a couple like that, and I think it's in The Lost Ways. I've honestly read too many, and I don't remember where everything is, but I think Lost Ways gets into that.
Interesting.
It's not particularly complicated, but as you can imagine, a little bit dangerous. If you have to cook something down that you later want to explode, you know. Right. Yeah. So that's what's up there, man. Yeah, I only had one more thing, Pete. How are you on time?
I'm good. I'm fine.
So I don't know. This might not be anything other than just another sign of things going real wacky. But the stuff I'm seeing on these California train robberies, dude, is just kind of. Did you see
our governor admit it's like a third world country here? That is so going to be used against him from every Republican running at the next governor election.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we've been saying it's a third world country here for years now. Thank you.
Yep. Well, here's what's interesting. You hear, and let's just acknowledge, there's always some weird thing that's happening in different places that if that's the only thing you hear, it's going to make it sound worse. So when I first heard about train robberies in California, I'm like, oh, so I'm thinking, like, you know, once or twice somebody's jumped onto a train and pulled some stuff off. When I saw the pictures and the video, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is far beyond what I would have even imagined.
It's Mad Max.
And yeah, I mean, it looks like, oh, I've been to plenty of third world countries. I'm going to tell you right now, that looks worse. That looks post-apocalyptic, man. That's just insanity. That's what happens. Like I'll get all pastor on it, but like Romans 1 talks about you abandon God and worship the creation rather than the creator. And what will happen is exactly what we are seeing. There's a continual degradation of values until at some point they actually make up new ways of being evil. And man, we're seeing that in our culture. And man, the leftist cities are at the absolute point of the spear on it, and it's just tragic. But man, plenty of other bad stuff going on around the country. So one of my concerns is people look at that kind of stuff and you're like, oh yeah, they're so bad and we're so much better. And I'm like, you live off the government. You sit on your butt because you say you get disability because your toe hurts sometimes. And I'm like, you're lazy and you could work and you are part of the problem. You're a socialist leech. Quit it. And so plenty of people that would say they're Republicans and they wave their American flags and say America. And I'm like, you're a slob who lives off the government. And when it goes down.
What's funny is that's exactly what I see when we're talking about seniors. They're little Mr. or Mrs. Republican until all of a sudden, don't you dare touch my Social Security check.
Yeah. Yep. Well, this could lead us into a much broader conversation that we really don't have time for. But I'll just point out, I always like to point out in the Old Testament, when God gave us the law, people think of the tithe and they think of like, oh yeah, you gave to the church or to whatever. And there was a tithe for that.
First of all, the tithe came before the law. So,
well, that's, yeah. Cause
you
Abraham tithe
like,
to Melchizedek.
You got so many people going, oh, we're not under the law anymore. Hey, look, the tithe came before the law. It had nothing to do with the law. So
I'm about to preach on this in a couple of weeks.
Are you?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Because if Abraham tied to Melchizedek, like this is before. But here's what's also interesting: in the law, you have that tithe that goes to the priests, because the priests were doing that work and didn't own land and all that kind of stuff. Then you have essentially a vacation tithe that every 2 years you were going to go to the temple. And so you were set aside, yes, to go to the temple, but it was this family trip where you were going to feast, and it was this whole thing. So like there was a tithe, and it was only biannual, as I recall, but that was fun money. It was like you're supposed to save and have fun with your family and go to the temple and do all that, but feast and enjoy it. There was a third tithe that was every 3 years, and it was called the poor tithe. And so it was designed every 3 years that you would give. And it wasn't the idea of we're going to keep subsidizing poverty. The idea was every 3 years, people who were still in poverty, you had a way to help them get on their feet. And there was even like rules on like the person who is permanently, legitimately disabled and the person who's not working and they don't get it. Right. But then also like you think about like seniors, like, can you imagine people are like, well, what if you got rid of Social Security? What would happen? And I'm like, you know what? I'd be able to take care of my family if you also took away my taxation.
Yep.
Like you take not just income taxation, but everything like that. Half my income's being taken half most of the time anyway. You add to it the fact that inflation is limiting the value. Man, I might be lucky if I get to keep 40% of my money that I earn. So if I had that other 60% that you all crap away, you know what I could do? I could take care of I could take in some more children, right? I could take in my parents right now. And so those are the kind of things that I just remind, like, there's a whole lot that can be done if the government gets out of the way. But admittedly, as families start to fail, as churches don't do what they're supposed to do, power hates a vacuum. And let me just tell you, the quote unquote governing authorities that I'm not even sure fit the biblical definition in the first place are happy to fill that void and take over. And that's what we're seeing. And some of it, they've engineered this. I would say the crack epidemic was an engineered way to get fathers out of homes. Actually,
I don't know that it started that way. I think they took advantage of it and just said, hey, here's something else we could do with this.
Well, when the CIA is bringing the cocaine in the first place
because they want to support, the Contras.
Well, and actually, if you get the chance to read Thomas Sowell, and he traces, people don't realize that like coming out of slavery was certainly hard for like African-American communities, but there was a huge growth. And by the 1920s, generally, Black families were doing quite well. And it was around the time that the welfare system took away the need for the woman to put on her welfare assistance the man's name, right? And so if the father did not have to have any responsibility, all bets were off. So now it was financially profitable if the father was not married and if he wasn't around. And they incentivized the destruction of the family. And that was a really bad thing. Anyway, read some Thomas Sowell, kids. He's good for you. Anyway, we've probably gone too long. I rambled a little bit. I do that sometimes. Anything else, Pete? Right. Otherwise, we'll do it.
Give Lake Erie their plug.
Everybody. Yeah, everybody, check out Lake Erie Arms. I know many of you in the region, you already have. Things are going well there. Exciting things coming down the pike we've already talked about. But now is a great time. I just personally will tell you, people, we've sold a whole lot of guns, and every now and then when people want to buy a gun, they come in and they trade in another gun. And so the stash of used guns, I would say, is steady as well. And there's some really good stuff in there. So I obviously recommend just going in, spend another $100, $200 and get what you really want. But man, if you just want another like truck gun, man, there's some Glocks in there. There's some stuff that it's like, and if you don't have a Glock, I don't like Glocks. Sorry, Pete. I like them.
Hey,
okay. They're just not my favorite.
Each their own.
But like, man, everybody should have a Glock because it's like, man, it's simple. It's not going to go bad. It's going to work well. You're going to be able to share mags with your buddies. It's good to have a Glock laying around, So anyway, great time to check out both new and used guns there. And there's some really cool new guns too. I'm just bragging on the used, but check out Lake Erie Arms. Visit learms.net, and we will see you soon.
Cool. All right, guys. We'll be back next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the From Concealment podcast with Pete Mitchell and Dan Sams. Be sure to tune in next week for more gun talk. Also, check out the From Concealment website for more shooting-related goodness at FromConcealment.com.